Hi, this is Pastor Paul DeVries coming to you along with
Quin Schultze.
We're coming to you from Brookside Christian Reformed Church. This is Brookside Stories. It is the story of Brookside that we are a collection of stories, and Quin Schultze is our master storyteller and communicator who often leads these interviews, but we're switching roles because I wonder, Quin, how did these things even come about, and how come you're involved?
Right, great questions. So during COVID, with churches not meeting, I was thinking to myself, how does a church get reorganized post-COVID and help reform community? And that was a big issue right after COVID.
Sure it was, yeah.
People were leaving, moving from one church to another, or just not attending. Everybody felt a little alienated from one another, and I thought to myself, hey, I got this communication background. What would I do, even though I'm a fairly new member here at Brookside Christian Reformed Church? And I thought a podcast might help. A podcast is like this, which is from the church, the stories of the church, back to the church, about the church, especially things for good that are happening, where the Spirit is alive and things are happening. And we can all say, oh yeah, God is alive, the Spirit's alive, things are happening. That was kind of the idea I had, and so then I pitched you on it, and you thought it was a good idea. And then at the beginning, we were still trying to find our way a little bit.
Yep.
And we got in the groove some, and then I thought, hey, rather than bog you down with all these and try to bring other guests in, I would just take the lead on some of them and bring people in and talk about what else is going on in the church, and then you and I would reconnect with the podcasts.
Right.
And so that's the idea. And I got there, Paul, because my wife would say that I overly care about communication. She would say, I'm a pain in the rear.
Can you overly care about such a thing? That might be your response.
Well, here's the thing. She said, I don't want to watch TV with you. I don't want to go to a movie with you. You're going to tell me how it's working and why they're doing it this way and that way. She says,
it's like going to film with my son.
Okay, yeah, same thing. You got it in your family too. So I tend to look at everything from the standpoint of communication, in part because I grew up in a family where there was almost no communication. It was horrible. My father was an alcoholic, and my mother was a paranoid schizophrenic. She became schizophrenic just after I was born, and she got TB and was in a sanitarium.
Oh, wow.
And so I never knew her as a quote-unquote normal person. She was always in communication with people that didn't exist, and it was very difficult to get along with her, and as well with my father. And then they got divorced when I was in 5th grade, and I lived with my mother, and I had 2 older brothers, but they were not part of this. They were already gone, 9 and 12 years older. And so I had to figure out how to, in a sense, raise myself and how to communicate. I went inward, Pastor Paul. That's how I dealt with it. I had almost no friends. I never went to a single social event in high school.
Well, how'd you get connected with church then?
Yeah, that's we'll get there, because it's an amazing story. God has a sense of humor on this. So I end up a lousy high school student, not going to social events, but then I took this thing called the ACT, which is like the SAT, and I did real well on it, and it would allow me to go to one of the schools in Illinois, greatly reduced expense and all, and I said maybe I should go to college. But so I ended up going to the University of Illinois, and while I'm there, I make some friends, great people, and they're sort of pulling me out of myself. And these people were Christians. They were followers of Jesus, the way I like to put it, and they were very involved in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship.
Great organization.
Great organization, a great place, one of the strong chapters of InterVarsity. And so there used to be an expression, Pastor Paul, you'll remember this because you're old enough, from the 70s, you're either on the bus or off the bus. This is sort of a cool expression. You either get with the program or you're not with the program.
Right.
And so they shared the gospel with me, and I began reading the Bible. I began buying theology books, going to church, and I thought to myself at the time, I'm going to try following Jesus. And then I began to realize this is in a great hymn, a Jean Sibelius hymn. I sought the Lord, and afterward I knew it was him seeking me.
Great hymn.
And so I became a follower of Jesus, a Christian, as we call them in the early church in Antioch. And I was going to study engineering. I still love engineering. I like things, like these great microphones we're using here and the technology. But I really needed communication.
Well, that's great.
I was so in. So I started studying communication, a new Christian, and I started putting my faith together with the study of communication. And I never looked back. And so I've had this wild life coming out of a childhood as a non-communicator who was teaching communication for years, 33 years at Calvin University alone. And I do workshops and webinars, and I write all kinds of books. I'm going to give a plug for my latest book because this is so funny. Look at this. You'll Shoot Your Eye Out. Life lessons from the movie A Christmas Story. And there's the leg lamp, and there's the glasses, that get crushed in it. And you say, how in the world would I end up writing a book on this movie? Well, stories, I learned, are the most potent form of human expression.
Yeah.
If you can tell a story like you do in your great sermons, an example, an illustration is a story, you can bring people in. So we're doing Brookside Stories now. And when I was an early professor at Calvin University around 1982, 1983, I was looking for the best storyteller in the United States. Who could I learn from? That's one way you learn, is find somebody who's the best at it, and guess what? I connected with the screenwriter who wrote the stories that are in the movie A Christmas Story, invited him to come to Calvin University, of all places, and teach this with me, and he agreed to it. He thought I was some kind of loony, because here I am at a Christian university, and he's going to come in and teach about story, and some of his stories are a little bit bawdy. I mean, a leg lamp, which, by the way, if you read my book, you find out is the old man's trophy wife. Ooh.
Yeah.
So, so at any rate, this is what I do. I study communication, I write about it, speak about it.
So, Quin, your involvement in Brookside Story is what I like to call an accident of grace. Right? I mean, you found your way to Brookside, at least in part because of COVID. We were meeting outside. You were sort of interested in what that looks like. And then over time, you become embedded here in the congregation. And even these podcasts, right? No one asked you to do them. We weren't really looking for it at the time. But you said, hey, I got this idea. And it sort of took on a life of its own, right?
Yeah.
And it matches your gifts, clearly. That's important. It's not an accident in that sense. You're a perfect person for it. But it's not a council-appointed position. It's not a staff position. If you've been waiting for your paycheck, one is not coming, right? I mean, you volunteer your time and your gifts. And that's the sort of thing God blesses his church with, at least in my experience,
and
over and over
That's
again.
what you see in these podcasts, over and over again. People involved in the church who are doing marvelous things, directed by the Holy Spirit. And I've learned in my own life, never underestimate what the Holy Spirit will do through someone. You probably think that today. You're a very gifted preacher, good at it. In fact, the way you lead the service overall, the different parts of it and put it together. But I bet there was a time early on when you asked yourself whether or not you could do it.
Well, most certainly. In fact, I pretty much expected I'd fail. My wife says the only reason she married a guy who was going to go to seminary is she didn't think I could cut it.
I love that.
So, but here's what I still find out. You're very complimentary, but the truth is the best part of my sermons are often unintentional. People will say, oh, I was so moved by X or Y, and I'm thinking, I didn't even really think of it that way, or I wasn't intending, right? That's the spirit, and that's what we're trying to capture in these podcasts. So we're at 3600 Kalamazoo. We're on the southeast side of Grand Rapids. You're welcome to come and check us out anytime, or just check us out on YouTube and listen to some of these podcasts. I think you'll be blessed. Thank you, Quin, for everything you do.
My pleasure, and you too, buddy.
All right. God bless. Thanks for listening.